Okay, available data sources. As mentioned in the literature review, the subject has been widely studied across many cultures and countries, including the World Health Organization and Center for Disease Control. Just one of the studies we mentioned earlier covered cross-national data from 93 different countries. The questions of infant survival and economic class are elemental enough to us as humans that practically every culture and nation on the planet takes them seriously. The CDC maintains the WONDER database, which includes the mother's location of residence, race and ethnicity, marital status, age, and education, but it doesn't contain anything about, to pick the two examples we'll be focusing on, the mother's nutrition or occupation, or things like amount of exercise. There's also the Pregnancy Risk Assessment Monitoring System, known as PRAMS, which is more maternal behavior and health information, but it still doesn't contain specific information about nutrition or occupation. The questions are yes or no, so the closest PRAMS can come to such things as to get what percentage of women who took a daily multivitamin during pregnancy were morbidly obese or things like that. There are also birth and death registries. Each state publicly provides this information, including causes of death, and it's broken down by county and municipality to give a better picture of areas with higher infant mortality rates. A great deal of research on the relationship between socioeconomic position and infant mortality specifically has been done. However, as the literature review concluded, there are conflicting results and findings. And there's the slide. As far as opportunities and data sources go, there's tons of available data. It's not an area that suffers from a weak foundation of material to build on. There will be a great deal more data available in this subject than something more remote, for certain. It's a high motivation subject. Grant funding and partnerships aren't that hard to come across. And while any emotionally charged subject will generate an emotionally charged response, in general, this subject is considered less controversial or politically charged than some might be. There could well be disagreements about specific implications or solutions, but there isn't anything like a counter lobby pushing to raise the infant mortality rate out there. Or if there is, we have other problems here. And of course, new discoveries have a high potential of directly benefiting people's lives, which helps a lot too. Challenges. The big one right out the gate is finding a relevant question that hasn't already been asked and hasn't already been formulated or reframed. The odds are good that any question we would ask has already been asked by someone. Along the same lines, data can't be framed around specific questions. The question has to follow the available data in the way that it's presented. In other words, we can't really go asking about, for example, specific occupational issues and expect to be able to draw on all available data sources. This can lead to a type of cognitive bias where the researcher frames his or her questions around the data available without recognizing that he or she has subtly changed the question or what answers may be uncovered by it. There's also potential endogeneity issues relating to the temptation to simply do cross-comparisons that haven't been done before. You could easily have a situation where data may be perfectly legitimate internally, but it might not be a legitimate comparison against a complementary study, or what appears to be a complementary study, and it's all dependent on the details of who was surveyed, how the information was collected, the exact demographics. This in particular can be an issue because the raw data of the studies being compared is unlikely to be available, especially given that this is mostly protected health information as far as HIPAA is concerned. Counterintuitive results need to be carefully checked. They have certainly been found in this topic, and recently our literature review covered some of them, and I'll be coming back to a couple of them. And the temptation would be to take them as relevant findings, but that must be weighed against the very real risk of internal or external biases, cross-study biases, or simply just flawed methodology. There's a lot of ways for this to go wrong. Timeliness. Large volumes of data are not collated instantly, unfortunately, but having at least 2 or more of our literature findings show that earlier findings in this field may well be obsolete, puts ongoing research in something of a quandary. The data most readily available may not actually be useful, unfortunately. And I mentioned there Baird, Friedman, and Shady. Circumstantial economic volatility can have a significant impact on infant mortality. If immediate circumstances can demonstrably influence results, quick and dirty studies or local studies won't be nearly as reliable as they might have been. Now, as far as personal information, it's not readily shared, not easily quantifiable. it's easy to discuss things like my two examples here, maternal nutrition and maternal occupation, but there are good reason why most studies don't study those. Food logs are difficult to get, and doubly so if you want them to be accurate. They're difficult to reduce to easily measured variables and difficult to draw generalizable conclusions from. Even something as simple as a daily calorie count would be unreliable and impractical if it's self-reported, but utterly impossible to get any other way. So, in conclusion, infant mortality rate, socioeconomic position, and their overlap are all widely studied topics. Results from those studies are inconsistent and potentially at odds with each other. Multiple opportunities are present for a researcher who would like to tackle this topic. However, multiple challenges also exist for that researcher for the same reason that the opportunities are there. So, moving on to the analysis plan. This case, we start at the beginning. Does a clear relationship still exist between socioeconomic position and infant mortality rate? Regidor et al. Said maybe not. As our literature review suggested, that matter is not nearly so settled as we expected it to be. If that relationship does exist, what can we conclude about it? Tack and Waldman found that infant mortality rate rose sharply above a certain line in socioeconomic position, with the highest 20% showing a marked increase in loss of infants. They did not have more information about this, so on its own, the study offers few firm conclusions. It raises more questions than it answers, but it's difficult to see that relationship and not wonder what exactly is going on there. However, the timeliness question does come back. If this stuff is changing over time, then getting the information quickly enough to yield timely results can be a real challenge. Expanding on correlations, exploring the implications and expanding on correlations. Relevant questions. Are perceived associations dependent on how the questions are framed? Going back to Tack and Waldman, does it matter that their unexpected correlation was found at the highest 20%? Had they framed their data in such a way that a more accurate answer might have been 22% or 18%? Does that matter to us? This isn't meant to question them, but just to show the dangers in generalizing other studies too broadly, especially without access to the raw data. And that filters through these other questions as well. Moving on to undocumented or unexplored dangers, can we get the data we need to truly isolate a potential issue? We started out this project expecting a strong relationship to exist between socioeconomic position and infant mortality rate, and we specifically wanted to explore specific gradients within lower socioeconomic positions to see if there were identifiable subsets of the blanket quote-unquote impoverished demographic that had better or worse rates of infant mortality. We found a wide variety of unexpected results. We had wanted to do some sample research based on what we could find, but the combination of unexpected research conclusions and a totally expected lack of raw data stopped that notion in its tracks. Actually drilling any of this down to answer previously unasked questions of the type we started out with would essentially require a new study to be done. So, going back to my two examples here, that said, if we were to do a study like this, it's not hard to come up with potential directions to focus on that might correlate with both lower socioeconomic position and higher infant mortality rate. Maternal diet and occupation both seem like possible starting points. Practical applications for this type of analysis would include basically any policies, regulations, or recommendations that are new or unrefined, loose or ill-defined, outdated or misinformed. Just basically anywhere where we thought we had an answer on the subject and, in fact, either things have changed or were never right to begin with. And, of course, there's always further potential research paths, especially when research conclusions disagree this sharply. In conclusion, despite the volume of research done on this subject, results are contradictory enough that basic questions must be addressed before any more complicated issues can be also answered. Assuming clear correlations exist without dispute, expected and unexpected correlations should be explored further, and newly revealed dangers or holes in our current understanding should be updated if possible, or else further research should be prepared. Thank you all very much for your time.